chakra it drives that people are rooted in that chakra. They're out of balance in that particular chakra. And that what it does is it causes them, when they reflect upon these major pillar questions, either consciously or unconsciously, they root on a particular answer that is rooted in fear and dissolution, that they're ultimately going to dissolve. There's this terrible terror that they have of ultimately dissolving into nothingness. And what they've done is, in effect, subconsciously, they've projected that root fear, that root experience, onto the intuition of these particular insights. And the fact is that it happens, you go right across the system of the chakras, and you start recognizing that the charisms of these particular worldviews are identical to the historical charisms that are attributed to the chakras. And you read in the Buddhist literature and the Hindu literature what all these qualities and characteristics are, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, you say, my goodness, isn't this far out? This tends to correlate directly with the underlying assumptions that are made on the part of the adherents to these worldviews that in fact cause them to guess at the answers to these pillar questions in a way that's completely consistent with the dominating charism of that particular chakra. So what I'm suggesting to you here is that there is a reason why our people attach themselves to these particular answers, to these fundamental questions. And so what it does is it places us in context, because what I'm saying to you here is that what is going on right now is a major effort on the part of our ethical community, our spiritual ethical community, to basically replay the same drama that took place back from 1878 all the way to the 1920s with the Chautauqua movement, of attempting to revisit the concepts of natural law that undergird the basic premises of our Constitution, that generates the concepts of egalitarianism and equal rights, and that no aristocracy is allowed to govern, to rise into power, that all of those discussions that were going on at the founding of our Constitution, that what we do is we resort to the Constitution, the basic natural law principles, to attempt to address and deal with this reactionary elite that believe that they're entitled to rule because they've discerned a reactive dialectical dynamic that's underlying reality. And the fact of the matter is they're questing constantly for power and dominion and to be able to ultimately vanquish the Aboriginal people of the world. And so therefore getting access to the resources that these people sit on top of is a perfectly natural undertaking, just like in Avatar. You know, these people are sitting on all of our whatever it was, that wowism that they were digging up in Avatar. You know, this dynamic is extremely important, because what we're doing right now is we're revisiting the historical assumptions of the radical monist worldview that were actually initiated in ancient Greece with the pre-Stoics and come all the way through Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, that come all the way into Western civilization. And what we're saying now is that, look, what we now know through the discoveries in quantum physics is that in fact there is a capacity on the part of our human beings through directed intentionality to actually influence the manifestation of material reality, as we talked about the other day, that this actually exists as a faculty that we have, and that through the biophysics they're now starting to be able to track and trace the function of this particular faculty. And the fact is it's going to grow into full fruition on the part of our human family if in fact we pay enough attention to it. If in fact we listen, we hearken to the admonitions that have been set forth by the great prophets of our human family, to control ourselves, to think in terms of exercising and strengthening this faculty that we have through meditation, through certain type of dietary practices, through certain type of abstaining from certain kind of vastly overstimulating experiences, because this is a very subtle faculty that we have here. And the fact is it can be very easily drowned out, even by the point of eating intense spicy foods all the time, and foods that the red meat that take up, you know, like 60% of all the energy that they give us just to digest them and process them. That there's knowledge in our human family about how we go about strengthening this particular faculty by means of which we discern the unitive phenomenon in the universe. And that this particular worldview, the reason that this is so important for us is because this is the worldview that undergirds the natural law worldview that is the underpinning of our American Constitution. And so that we can point to the authorization that exists inside our country to engage in the utilization of this natural law philosophy to justify our resistance to these robber barons in the elite taking over the control of an otherwise democratic government. We can cite all of these major principles as operative, but very most importantly, this is in fact what we are authorized to do, because the jurisdiction of this particular worldview is confined specifically to functioning inside the monad. That this faculty that we have gives us access, experiential access, only to data that exists inside this unitive phenomenon, which has its own particular pitch and amplitude, like sight or like light or hearing, that this attractive force that bonds the universe together in this kind of magnetism has its own particular pitch and amplitude. We have direct, immediate experiential access to it, but in fact, it only tells us everything about what's going on here. So you can remote view far distant places. You can remote view far distant times, because time itself exists only inside this particular experience, because it's simply a function of the stage of expansion or contraction that our universe is in at any given time. That all you can say is what time is it in accordance to the oscillation of the universe that we happen to be engaged in at this particular time. You know, what o'clock is it? You know, 13 billion, 0.7 times 2 and 8 is 10. You know, you can figure these things out. But the reason that that's so important is because this jurisdiction is completely authorized for us to translate into public policy. You are authorized, pursuant to the natural law theory, to resort to the exercise of this intuitive faculty to make our judgments democratically about what policies should be followed. What you're not allowed to do is start invoking this authority out here, because that is a different faculty. The genuinely spiritual faculty is different than the actual physical faculty of being able to physically, phenomenologically access the data that abides inside the physical cosmos, which is our legitimate jurisdiction politically as a democracy, okay? Because there is welded into this system the understanding that while we pursue those policies rooted upon our democratic and majoritarian collective experience and judgment about what the nature of reality is, pursuant to which we choose particular public policy options, we have also asserted that inside that system there is a check on the power and authority of the majority that is being made pursuant to this process. There are, in fact, fundamental rights that we all possess individually that have caused us to put a limitation on the actual governing structures that we have created, so that they're without authority to basically invoke the authority of any type of infinite and eternal sea of undifferentiated consciousness that is off limits. That we are authorized as individuals to engage in that particular process. We're actually called upon to do so, and we can integrate those considerations into making our judgments. But the fact of the matter is the governing structure, we cannot translate these into governing structures. Okay? And so that we have our governing institutions are without the authority to engage in any type of theocracy, other than recognizing the fundamental rights that individuals have that we understand to flow from a natural law understanding of our origins and our place in the universe. So what I'm saying to you is that the curriculum, in some sense, that we're going to be sharing with our friends and neighbors to discuss this natural law worldview, this new sixth paradigm, new paradigm worldview, is going to directly involve knowledge about quantum physics, the knowledge that they've now discerned within quantum physics about the clear interrelationship among the integral matter, interlocking integers of matter in the universe, that this knowledge is going to be shared with our friends and our neighbors and our family to justify the natural law positions that we're going to be taking, because it begins to explain to us our place in the universe. Inside the universe, it explains our place. And it explains the relative place of other civilizations, other sentient beings, etc. And so that we can, in fact, invoke these natural law principles on behalf of ourselves, not only to lift ourselves out from under the servitude of this royalist and ecclesial elite, but that it can, in fact, also be invoked as the source, the ethical, normative, natural law source of the public policy proposals that we make. And that we have the authority under our Constitution to do exactly that. And this is a much more radical position than the position that is being taken by the reactionaries. Okay? Now, I reiterate again, and I reemphasize, it doesn't mean that our assumptions about the answers to these four pillar questions is any more right in an absolute sense than theirs is. But the fact of the matter is we have the advantage of saying, well, that's the one our Constitution is based on. Okay? That's the choice that was made at the founding of our Constitution. The particular experiment that we're engaged in here in North America is rooted in this natural law worldview. And so when it comes time to laying your cards down on the table, we've got the aces. We've got the aces. Yes, we do. Because we, in fact, understand the natural law worldview. We can make the arguments that dissipate their arguments, that get lower than their arguments, digged in deeper. We can espouse the natural law worldview as the underlying predicate, and we can rationally argue and demonstrate step by step through the natural law worldview how this particular right that we have checkmates their authority to do what it is they're trying to do. And that the only way that they can possibly prevail is by cheating and manipulating and trying to buy off and bribe all the leadership. And that's criminal. We have succeeded in getting that defined as criminal. And so they're weighing in against us, trying to set aside the natural law principles and laws that we have that have set checks on them. And so they're consciously trying to eliminate those legislatively and judicially. And so we are engaged in a discussion, but we have to be careful. We have to be careful of two things here. One is not to allow ourselves to get drawn into the dialectic of viewing ourselves as just the antipodal position to their particular thesis. Because if we do that, that's their ballgame. If they get you drawn into the dialectic and that you end up demonizing them, defining them as the ultimate other, that somehow that we're authorized to vanquish them ultimately, that's our ultimate goal, then they've won half of the battle. So we have to maintain not a dialectical dynamic with them, but just an affirmative espousal of our particular worldview. And that we undertake to express that democratically. If they resist us, we challenge them. We invoke the authority of the Constitution. We invoke the individual rights that we have and are recognized by the Constitution. And we engage in vitiating their power. And this we do through like a Chautauqua movement kind of process. Okay? The second thing that we need to be careful of, very important, is we have to be careful of this gravitating toward an absolutist position with regard to our intuitive insights about the pillar beliefs, so that we think that we have the absolute right on our side, and that therefore we have the right to superimpose on others through force and power our particular majoritarian opinions. Because in the same sense that these fundamental rights exist on the part of the individual over and against the power of the state, over and against the majoritarian decision making, these fundamental rights belong to everybody in the world. They don't belong just to us as Americans. That these are fundamental principles that obtain in the world. And therefore, we do not have the authority to wage war on them, to force them to abide by our particular views. We don't have the right to coerce them into doing it. We can attempt to persuade them. We can attempt to explain our position to people. And we can do this on a global level. Okay, and so these are the particulars that I wanted to be able to get in front of us so that you can understand what we're dealing with here. Because the middle marginalists that are in the midst of all of this thing, the middle marginalists actually are taking a position sort of midway. Now, what I can point out is that the differentiation from right to left on this particular sociological bar graph really is rooted in the ever-increasing awareness of the existence of this faculty as being an evolutionary function of our teleology. That this is that the more we become aware of this, the farther we move in this particular direction in the political spectrum. Okay? And so that we hang out here advocating this as the natural law worldview, and we can point out that there is a process by means of which other people, by engaging in the practices that we're talking about, of meditative practices and dietary practices and abstaining from certain types of conduct, etc., can strengthen this particular faculty. And we point out that this is, in our judgment, the salvation dynamic of our human family. That as a species, are coming to recognize the evolution of this particular faculty, embracing it, and participating in accelerating it, is in fact the dynamic. It is the way out from under this servitude of these people, rather than getting into confrontations with them and trying to kill them or trying to imprison all of them. You know, what we're doing is we're openly espousing this particular worldview, and we are engaging in a friendly, open advocacy, not an adversary process against them. We're not here to condemn them. We're not here to imprison them or kill them. What we are here to do is to grow an alternative vision and to take charge of establishing an alternative regime, an alternative system of philosophies and laws, etc. And we do so democratically. And what we need to do is we need to be familiar with the tools that we have at our disposal under our democratic system, of how you organize political parties, how you set forth candidates to be able to advocate our positions, how you use the media to communicate those ideas to other beings, etc. That this is the task that's before us, and that one of the many public policy positions that we take would be the fact that we believe that there is extraterrestrial intelligence, and that we believe that we are going to be sooner than later having direct contact with them. We are going to understand that the powers that be are in the process of trying to feather in this information to us through this kind of opening discovery of new planets with new and more complex life forms on it, and are going to just try to ignore the fact that for 68 years they've been concealing the fact that there are extraterrestrial beings that are actually visiting us, and that have been visiting us for some time. They don't go there, okay? Because that's going to reveal that they've been trying to steal and utilize that technology for their own selfish benefits. You know, whether they're the authoritarians that are trying to establish some breakaway civilization and just, you know, garner the power and stuff for themselves, or whether it's the dialecticians that are going to try to figure out how to develop this technology into warfare so they can engage in combat with the extraterrestrials, because that's the ultimate dialectic, you know, that can rationalize the national security state, you know, to working our way on through. All we're saying is that this is our particular position. We happen to have the added benefit of it being endorsed by our Constitution, which is the underlying and governing document as to how these discourses are to be played out in a democracy. And if the other side cheats and tries to just cheat on the rules and regulations that govern the process, we have to call them on that. And we point this out to them. But the bottom line is, we can't just say, oh, we've caught you, you ought to punish yourself, because they're not going to do that. So what we have to do is we have to develop an alternative system of enforcement of these particular rights, in that there's an entire panoply of means by which we can do this. That, for example, Gene Sharp chaired a major set of studies that were done at Harvard University. There's a 3-volume set of the engaging in nonviolent political activity, by means of which you can, in fact, oust an occupying power from your country if you've been invaded and occupied. And there's example after example of how we go about doing this type of thing. And I would recommend that to you, the 3-volume set that you can get them for like $4 each, you know, on Amazon, is Gene Sharp's Nonviolent Political Activity. And these are things that we're going to have to know about because they have to do with public education, grassroots organizing, political organizing, creating political parties, learning how to withdraw power from these people by resisting their indoctrination that somehow we have to do whatever it is they tell us. You know, this thing we talked about at the panel last night, you know, of having 100 people held hostage by a guy with 1 bullet in his gun, you know, and nobody dares take them on. You know, the fact is they can't deal with all of us. You know, if we all mobilize and we do this, they can't deal with us. Now, they'll try to pick us off one at a time. That's my job, is to represent you when they try to do that. You know, and to recruit other attorneys to participate in that particular process, because we know what the tools are under the constitutional system to confront them on this, okay? But the bottom line is we have to come to understand what these values are. We have to understand that not only does this give us the tools and the capacity to cope with this elite, this royalist and ecclesial elite that attempt to superimpose their views upon us, but in fact, it begins to provide for us the tools pursuant to which we can dialogue with the extraterrestrial civilization about the nature of our people. That this is what we're like, that this is what's going on, that we have insights about this, we're attempting to espouse these particular beliefs, etc. That, you know, that your civilization has almost undoubtedly reflected upon things that are similar to this. Where are you at right now on this? You know, and so that gives us the tools to be the diplomats, to actually have this kind of a conversation with the extraterrestrial beings, you know, and so that there's all kinds of training that you're going to need. Some of it is the holotropic breathing, because the fact of the matter is, no matter how much you think you're going to be a stalwart in the face of one of these beings appearing in front of you, let me suggest that you have a biological program that is going to react instantaneously from your root chakra. That somehow this is the ultimate other. And that you're being confronted with it experientially, and your whole body is going to react instinctively about this. And so that this training of the holotropic breathing to get yourself into a calm state and to exercise the photoplasma around your body, this kind of more sensitive system of discernment, etc., to strengthen it for these engagements with these beings is going to be extremely important. So that, you know, this actually translates itself into some fairly prosaic disciplines that you really need to have. And what we're in the process now of talking about, trying to figure out a school, you know, where this kind of training can be done consistently. You know, we can do it in these periodic gatherings when we meet here, or the International UFO Congress in Scottsdale, or the MUFON, you know, down in Orange County, or wherever we do. But the fact is, we need to have classes like this to train a diplomatic corps. You know, now many of you may not be willing to do this, but I'm hoping that you will, and that this is an extremely interesting set of tools to be able to understand, to train ourselves to do this process, and we can all help each other out. But you need to reference the Chautauqua movement, where this began to build, and people immediately experientially recognized this as the legitimate undertaking. That this is an entirely constitutional process. It's the people rising up, and the fact that we criticize the robber barons, the fact that we criticize the bankers for doing what they've done, the fact that we criticize groups like Brown Brothers Harriman and these other groups that come together to expropriate the resources of people and invoke military power to go in and crush these people, like the indigenous people in South America that are trying to stop them from burning down all of the rainforests and setting up cattle ranches for Burger King, you know, and that we have to mobilize and protect our people, and we have to try to conscientize the other people, but don't make the mistake of thinking that our primary job is trying to convert these people. You know, don't spend your time trying to do that, because you're not focusing on the right constituency. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to find all of those people who are in between worldviews, who have incongruous, intuitive opinions about the answers to these questions, who in fact are confused and feel disempowered from participating in this conversation. What we want to do is we want to be able to, just like a tuning fork, ring that clear tone, so that when they're in the presence of it, the kind of resonating tone of that clear worldview is one that starts to tune their energy systems into recognizing this as a clear harmonic note. Okay? Now, but it's important to remember that the types of pure light that we're able to discern through our faculty of sight, of the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, it's important to remember that if you take a laser beam of that pure light color and you shine all of these 7 pure forms of light in laser beams onto a single point, they will set up a mutual interference pattern that generates white light. So the reality is that every single one of these chakras that we have in our body is a purely legitimate function of our human species. That they're not one bad and the other good, this one's better than that one. These, in fact, are all necessary for us to be able to open onto the 8th paradigm that, in fact, completes this octave. Because this 8th paradigm, as I mentioned, is the 8th chakra that abides high above the head, and that virtually is never opened on the part of any of the avatars. But they know that it's there. And the reality may well be, as I've mentioned before, that the opening of this 8th chakra on the part of our human family may well discover that this is the root chakra of the next octave of being, where extraterrestrials may in fact reside already. And it's the means of communion with them. Okay? And so that we do not want to demonize the adherence to these other worldviews. We do not want to denigrate the legitimacy of the exercise of these particular chakras. What we want to do is to make sure that our chakras are in proper tune, that there's a certain frequency for the chakras that is in fact completely healthy. There's in fact a particular pitch and amplitude that the chakras abide at. There's a certain rate of rotation in the body that they function at an ideal. And the fact of the matter is when they are in fact functioning at the proper frequency, rotating at the proper rate, and at the right tip to the ecliptic, what this does is generates the chi energy in the body that actually moves through the human body and exits the crown chakra and gets access to the eighth chakra to open that chakra. So that we need to understand that this is a science. This is understood by the ancient Hindus and the Upanishads and the Buddhists, that these are insights that we have to bring all together for our teaching and our understanding, okay? Because we have to experience and understand our human family to be one entire species. And we have to be able to advocate with the extraterrestrials the legitimacy of our human family to take our place at the table with them in the governance of our galaxy and of the intergalactic councils. You know, that we do not want to throw the rest of our species under the bus, or in this case, under the UFO. We don't want to do that. That we've got to be able to advocate for our human family in all of our various permutations so that they understand that we understand what this dynamic is, and that we're going to be engaged in lifting our entire human family collectively so that when we shine our different worldviews on this issue, that it will generate white light. And the white light is what they recognize. But they do recognize the other dominant chakras. They'll go, oh, there's one of those, you know? And so they'll say to us, they say, oh, so you're one of these sixth paradigm people, huh? You know, and they'll say, what about that 7th paradigm? What about opening that spiritual faculty? We'll say, oh, yes, you know, that too. It's just that we don't bring that to the governing process. That we have come to recognize that is not a legitimate factor to bring into our mutual governing, because every individual has to be left to herself or himself to make those types of decisions. At which point they're going to go, you guys, you know. They're going to say, okay, because that's taken us a long time to figure that one out, they're going to say, okay? And so that we can then share with them what their experience is in this area. They can share with us, and that we can have this constant the diplomatic process of ushering us into the actual new age, into the new paradigm. But we're going to come to that 8th paradigm through the 6th. That we need to be dealing with this as the new paradigm that we're talking about. This quantum physics engined expansion and modification of the classic radical monist 6th paradigm pre-Socratic worldview that governs Western civilization and justifies our concepts of democracy and individual human rights and restricted power on the part of our governing institutions. This is something that I think is worth sharing with the extraterrestrial beings. You know, they may in fact say, oh yeah, we thought of that a long time ago. We say, great, you know, great. Then we're in agreement on this. And they may say, oh, there's lots of things you don't understand yet. And we'll say, yeah, I can bet on that. You know, but we're not ashamed of that. We understand that there are things that we don't understand. But we do not want our entire civilization to be completely atrophied by an encounter with this more highly technologically developed civilization. Because as we pointed out, that's happened over and over again. And guys like Stephen Hawking and other people cite this as a danger to say, oh, look what always happens. When a more highly developed technological civilization encounters a lesser one, they completely destroy that entire culture. And they subsume all of those people into their culture, and they become, you know, dislocated and basically destroyed. And we don't want that to happen. So what we want to be able to do is to be able to figure out the best positions for us to be able to espouse to the extraterrestrial beings, so that they respect us, so they don't view us as kind of sniveling traitors, you know, that have come to establish, you know, brown nosing with them, you know, and ready to throw the rest of our people under the bus. You know, that we're there to espouse on behalf of all of us, and I believe that they're going to respect that. And you know, so but I want to participate in helping us train ourselves for this. That we're in the process of some discussions right now. There are a number of people who actually have access to a number of different technologies having to do with the sustainable energy, renewable energy that we're in the process of persuading to not put those devices onto the normal market and generate personal profit to make people rich with those things, but to in fact integrate them into this process that we're talking about, so that the income generated by the sale of those technologies to some of the larger users of those will enable the funds to make other of these devices free to people throughout the world. As I said, to free women up from having to spend 10 hours a day walking, 20 miles or whatever it is, to get jars of water and bring them back for their children. You know, that we want to be able to provide these kind of abilities without destroying the other people's cultures. Okay, so that's where we are. That's our purpose. And what I want to do is there's more to be dealt with on this. But what I want to do is answer some of your questions that we have here in this kind of closing day that we have. Okay.
And if you could wait for a microphone, it'd be good to get them on tape.
It's not as exciting and thrilling as some of the other presentations, but it's really important. It's a little more academic. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Is it okay? This is live.
You are perhaps the most brilliant speaker I've ever heard on the question of contact with extraterrestrials. There's one other factor that, however, I'd like to say that you haven't considered, and that is that this is not the first time that there has been a contact with extraterrestrials. And in particular, the Tibetans, who I've studied very intensively, have a method of thinking which is not like any of the rigid paradigms that you've spoken of. and in particular the system of the Dzogchen, which is a very minority point of view in the Tibetan system, which has been hampered by their development of a priesthood and by a certain rigidification. But in the Tibetan system, they speak about contact with extraterrestrials in the past and speak about certain tantric systems of meditation and of philosophy, particularly the Dzogchen, the Rigpa. They speak about a way of being able to think from the point of view of a number of different points of view simultaneously. And that's in the notion of Rigpa. Yeah. So I just want to just say that there is more to this than just natural law. Yeah. Natural law, and going back to the Chautauqua system, is going back to a very early method of facing human problems. But there's a more developed system in the Tibetans.
I understand. And the fact is that what you can see is there's still an entire 8 paradigm worldview that is at the present time sort of out beyond the time horizon and the event horizon of a lot of the more Western cultural understanding. And that therefore this discussion will be going on in the classes as well, while we're in fact focusing on this one for political organizing purposes. This entire other area is going to have to be explored as well. You know, what is it in fact that we anticipate knowing about from much more minority views around the planet? What other resources do we have to draw upon? So that I appreciate that. The Native American culture, of course, is the same. Many discussions about the Star people and the contacts that people have had in Indigenous history about these. The Lakota, for example, I happen to represent the 9 tribes of the Lakota people, the Ocheti, Sakawan, Oyate, in the Dakotas, and they understand that they come from the Pleiades. That they're very clear about that. They come from the Pleiades, and they came up through the wind caves and the Black Hills, and came out onto the prairies and have established their culture there, and that they're in dialogue with the Palladians. You know, and it doesn't strike them as surprising at all. Yes, Joe.
So, Danny, first and foremost, thank you. This is just brilliant. It's like getting a Harvard education in 3 hours instead of 3 years for free. So, last night's panel was fantastic. I'm shouting hallelujah from the back. I have some concerns about conflating the radical voluntary free market capitalism with coercive transnational corporatism. So I'd love for you to distinguish that in the future. I mean, that act of mutual benefit where both sides of a free exchange say thank you with gratitude. People paid a few $100s to come here, and they got more value out of it than the $300 represents to them, and Joshua Tree loves your money more than, you know, whatever they created. Both sides win. We're all grateful. That's capitalism. Transnational corporatism is different. So the panel the night before, I mentioned natural law here. I don't think you were there. And what I said was, there's no Republicans and Democrats out in the universe, as a matter of my personal belief. But there are libertarians out there, by which I meant people who have self-discerned natural law. And I'm so excited to hear you suggest that's a possibility here. The intuitionalists said that natural law was self-evident, at least among evolved folk. So can you speak to, I'm asking a question, can you speak, I mean, Danny and I have a long background on this. Can you speak to the principles that I brought up 2 nights ago of the non-initiation of violence and self-ownership as they relate to natural law? Sorry for taking so long.
No. That this is an important thing that Joe points out, is that you'll notice that I've been discussing consistently this particular business model of the corporation and the immunization of the owners of the assets from any type of legal liability in the management, et cetera, and the fact that this particular business device inevitably drives the participants toward avarice and greed in maximizing the amount of resources that they're constantly drawing into the maw of the capitalist machinery to generate excess profit. There is, in fact, a very definite part of the tradition of the natural law is that individual persons have the right to mix their own labor in with certain natural resources and give them a certain possessory interest in that improved natural materials, and that they're free to discuss with others the exchange of the product of their labor with each other's. And that this whole process is going to be a major part of our discussion, because there needs to be some sort of alternative method by means of which natural resources are in fact discerned and developed and utilized by our human family, at least until we all become breatharians, and that we don't need nuts and berries or natural grains or anything to live on, and so that there is an important, if you will, economic dimension to the natural law theory, and so that the targeting of the corporation as a major business model that needs to be overcome and replaced with some sort of a more naturalistic system of barter and exchange of goods and services is going to be an integral part of this whole dialogue. And there's been a lot of discussion about the natural gravitation of a discussion like this toward what they call bioregionalism, that there are different bioregions on the planet that seem to function in a naturally integrated system, usually around water systems in the watershed areas of those that generate certain types of resources, et cetera, that are generic to that area, in having access to a means of exchanging the excesses of that particular resource with others who do not have it, and they have an excess of other resources. So this whole economic dimension to this discussion is going to be an extremely important one, so that Joe is right. And in fact, it may surprise people to know that in fact the Libertarian Party has historically in the past had an actual plank in their platform to try to do away with state-drafted corporations, because they have this exact effect. They have this exact effect upon distorting a natural development system, an exchange system. So that this is an important caveat, that there are going to be different methodologies for these classes, pursuant to which you can, for example, identify the 22 national departments for which there are cabinet-level posts in the federal government directing their attention to particular issues, so that we can start to define what issues we need to address pursuant to the natural law and develop alternative policies, et cetera. Because you need concrete programs to offer to people, because before they'll let go of something, they need to know that there's some place to step to. They need to know where they're going in order to let go of an old habit that they've got. So that this is an important point. Yes?
Hi. I'm sorry, but unfortunately I missed most of the lecture. Didn't get here till 11. I'm bummed out.
That could cause some difficulty.
Yeah, but I did notice, based on the amount of times that you use the word pursuant, that you're probably an attorney?
Yes.
Okay. I'm in law school, and I made the mistake of communicating some of my experiences with, in my life with ETs in the past and present. And I got a call, or I found out from the dean, got a call in that if you continue to talk like this, or if you continue to communicate this information or talk to people about it, you're going to ruin your life. Mm-hmm. And people think you're getting a reputation. You have. He said, people are thinking you're crazy. So I had to transfer, and I did. And because it turns out the person I was communicating with, I found out was an agent. And I wondered if you could tell me how it's affected you as far as your career, because I know Andy Bashago, who's an attorney, is sleeping on the couch right now, somebody's couch. He has no life. He has no clients. Mm-hmm. How?
What I've done is I view my clients, as it were, as being people in our human family, our whole collective people. The fact is, here it is, that I got asked by some people to actually sit down and write some stuff up This is called The People's Advocate. This is the book about how, this is an answer to your question, how has this affected my legal practice? How did it deal with the law firms and Bailey and others? And how did I come to being in the kind of position I am now? But interestingly enough, the editors of this edited out all the parts about the ET stuff because they said, oh, look it, we don't want people to think you're crazy, you know, which was interesting because I'm writing 3 books for them. And so the second book that we're working on right now is called Rulers of the Realm, identifying these corporate people and what they're doing and in laying out the public policy problem. And then the third book, which is going to be The Dream Fulfilled, is actually laying out this process of setting up these chautauquas and getting people to work with the issues of extraterrestrials and the destabilizing effect of the contact with extraterrestrials on the worldviews, et cetera. That'll be the third book. So that you're right, that there needs to be kind of a comprehensive explication of how this phenomenon intersects with people's practical lives. And I've done it, so there's some of these here. My staff people brought these over if you want one. Afterwards, yeah, it's
okay.
Yes.
Well,
You're right.
Okay.
Where's? Oh, there we are. You're right.
On my way to, before I ever went to law school, I took a minor in philosophy, as biological and natural sciences, and I'll tell you, I've certainly here today have had my comeuppance as far as what I thought I knew. Okay, said in an incredibly eloquent way by you, and having been an idealist at various points in my time in my life, and saying, I wish I could sustain a momentum because we get sidetracked by a lot of things. Let's face it, we get sidetracked, and the momentum that we have right now, the enthusiasm that you have presented to us, okay, by you're mentioning directed intent, take our enthusiasm, okay, at whatever stage we are at, and I'm an older person, there's so many younger here that could actually have more opportunity to put this to work than those of us that are at older points in our lives, and I'd say, this is where directed intent to do this sort of thing could come into play, because we know enough about the natural world, and we actually inherently know what we should be doing. I mean, those of us who know this must have that little nudge of guilt that we could always do more, but we never did it, or we kept our mouth shut, or whatever. We let ourselves go along with the flow. And you know what you're calling forward out of us is a commitment.
That's right. No, that's right. There's no doubt this is a recruiting endeavor here that I'm talking about. And it reminds me of when I was at Harvard College, Ralph Nader came by to talk to all of us, and it got to the end, and I stood up and I said, "Oh, this is great. This is great, Michelle, but how do we get to come to work with you?" And he said, you got to understand, what you got to do is you got to do this yourself. You got to take up the responsibility for doing this, and this organizing your community, your family, your friends, getting around to sit around and talk with them about these things is the thing that we have to start at each of our local levels. And that what we'll do is that we have at our office at the Romero Institute, and I'll give you you can contact me anytime. At the Romero Institute, we have a whole sub-project on this that is called Open Skies Ministry. And that there's a website. If you look up on the Romero Institute, you can find it. And it's got a number of the talks. They'll put these talks up on that too. But what we need to do is that what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to organize a methodology by means of which, as I started to mention, that the income that is generated by the sale of some of these alternative energy sources that are in and of themselves part of the solution is going to be funneled back into the organization, so that you don't have people walking away getting rich over the sale of these things, but it's just going to be a completely reasonable salary to the people, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, and that whole process will be set up so that we can then facilitate the coordination of the events going on with these schools. So that, that I want to be available, I want to be responsive to this, and I also want to make sure that the energy is primarily out in the individuals making this happen. So we're perfectly available, and we have more discussions today with some of the people here about that, such an organization. Yes?
This has been fabulous. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. I'm a psychotherapist, and for a long, long time, I have been attempting to incorporate principles of natural law into my work, primarily individually, but also with families and with groups. And so recently I was talking with someone I know who works at Pfizer.
Yes.
And so we were having a conversation about the utility of using psychoeducation to help people begin to identify basic gut-level core beliefs that inform their worldview, and how important it is to provide the information necessary to help a person begin to redefine their identity and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I was essentially saying, you guys think you could put some money up for that? And there was a tension there, that you encounter in the conflictual conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, you need to figure out how to reframe the conversation in order to begin to explore ways that Pfizer can make money off the field of consciousness.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, to me, what that brings to mind to me is this idea of taking these concepts and teaching this diplomacy in vocationally specific ways. Mm-hmm.
No, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. The key is to keep in mind that one of the purposes of this whole process is to facilitate our discerning how to deconstruct the structural sources of injustice. And this whole process of people being motivated simply by trying to increase the amount of money that they have there's the old famous Tai Chi master's story, when the people said to the Tai Chi master, they said, "Can you tell us who the best student was that you had of Tai Chi?" And he said, I will tell you of my 3 best students. He said that I set up this test of having this doorway, and I put this bag of rice up on a little platform over the doorway, and when you open the doorway, the little rope pulls the platform down, and the bag of rice will fall on you. And so I told to my 3rd best student, I said, "Go, pass through this door." And they went, and they opened the door, and just as the flap fell and the bag of rice started to fall, they realized immediately what it was and leapt up and pinned it to the wall. So the student says to the master, "Wow!" He said, "Wow, that was far out. That's like the 3rd best student you had?" He said, "Yes, yes, yes." And the student said, "Well, tell me of your 2nd best student." He said, "The 2nd best student," I said, "Here, go pass through this door." And he reached and he opened the door like this. And before the platform even fell, before the bag of rice even began to move, she leapt up and she pinned the bag of rice to the wall before it ever moved. And the student said, "Oh, wow, that was your 2nd best student? That's really far out. What about your 1st best student?" I said, "Oh, my 1st best student." I said to her, "Here, pass through that door." And she said, "No, master." Okay? So what you need to understand is that you do not want to be talked into this by Pfizer, of saying, here, what you really need to do is turn this into corporate counseling, so that they can figure out how you can get paid a lot of money to get workshops to train people to be better capitalists and better corporate executives. That the key is that we've got to dissolve away the corporation itself. We've got to establish alternative methods by means of which our people work together and cooperate together to provide for the needs of our people. That's what we need to do. And that there are going to be these threshold challenges right at the very beginning, where they're going to say, and I've had it said at the State of the World Forum. We actually ran the State of the World Forum. Sarah Nelson, my wife, our executive director, was the executive director of the State of the World Forum for Gorbachev. I ran the central project, was the project to identify the new paradigm at the State of the World Forum at the end of the Cold War. We invited in all the former presidents, vice presidents, secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, and we would sit in small groups like this discussing these matters. I was in charge of explicating the worldviews and getting them to understand them, et cetera. And one of the things that kept happening is the major corporations kept showing up. And they kept saying, look, you've got to have all the stakeholders at the table. We all have to have a place at the table. And they kept saying to us over and over again, they kept saying, look, whatever this new paradigm is that we are going to be talking about here in the post-Cold War period, before there's some new ultimate other identified by the bad guys, he said, look, as long as whatever the new paradigm is going to be, just don't try to change the system of transnational corporate capitalism. Just keep that the same, and we'll give you major contributions. We'll help you run the State of the World Forum, okay? And so that we had to keep saying, no, that's not what's going to be happening here. And they kept saying things like, oh, it's okay if you can find some alternative source of energy, as long as we can own it. Those of us that are the petroleum industry, as long as we can own it, and we can set up a central system where we can meter it out and control it, well, we'll let go of the petroleum and the oil and the coal as long as we can continue to own this. So, and you have to say no, that can't be allowed. And so that we need to understand these threshold questions that we have to deal with in the school. Okay, so that they're throwing us out of here now. So we have to leave, but stay in touch with me. That you can reach us anytime. Okay. Okay. Sure. Okay. So anyway, that's and you can reach all of us. You can contact the people here, and they'll give you our contact information at the Romero Institute.
You don't have to leave the building right away, but you can talk to Danny on your own. And DVDs will be available this afternoon up at the sanctuary. Thanks for attending.
You're fabulous. I got more out of this than anything else. That's the next case.
Yeah. Well, I'm appreciative of getting to be here. I was delighted to get a chance.
This is exactly what I tried to do at the LA Free Press. This was to bring the community together. You have a program to do it. Mm-hmm. Brilliant.
Hopefully